Has your brother locked you away to steal your kingdom? Has your cousin beat you to the treasury and stolen your crown? Have you succumbed to illness and predeceased your father, the king? Hi, I'm Veronica Fortune. Past is the podcast about those who would never rule. Please join me to hear the stories of the almost kings and queens of history.
And that, my friends, was Veronica from Past Podcasts. If you like our podcast, I strongly suggest you listen to hers. I'm sure it will be just your cup of tea.
Welcome to another episode of Cork Out History,
Where we drink Portuguese wine.
and we talk about Portuguese history.
Mostly the wine.
My name is André,
And I'm Inês.
and welcome to Cork Out History.
And hello everyone! Here we are once again to bring you another Portuguese lady. Hi Andre, how are you today?
Hi Nish, I'm good. How are you? Here we are once more for another someone. Yes.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm ready to get right on with this. So tell me, what are we drinking today?
So today we are drinking Três Bagos,
Ooh.
which would translate to something like 3 berries.
Yeah, 3 berries.
Yes, something
Okay.
like that. Três Bagos, it's a wine from the Douro region.
So north of the country.
Yeah, so from the north of the country, and I've never tried the red one. That's what we're having today. I've only tried the white one. It was actually my mother-in-law that introduced me to it, but I've never tried the red. So today we're going to try the red, and it's a 2016 one, so I hope it's good. Let's open the bottle.
I'm sure it will rise to the challenge of the lady we are going to speak today. The standard is quite high, because today we're going to be talking about Gracia Mendes. So that's like, if you kind of English the name a little bit, that would be like what? Gracia Mendes or something, if you want to kind of visualize how you would write that, I guess. But
Yes.
we are going to be referring to her as Gracia.
Perfect. Gracia it is then. And we are actually lucky this time, right? Because there's a lot of documents about her life, isn't there?
Yeah, it's amazing because usually we are, in our last episodes, we weren't so lucky, we didn't have so much to base ourselves from.
So this time, as we were saying, we were actually very lucky because she has a particularly well-documented life, hasn't she? And it's quite a life, which will allow us to marvel at the path that she makes for herself through very difficult time in Europe. We're going to be talking about a terribly racist and anti-Semitic setting of 16th century Europe.
Yeah, those times were rough and we have a lot to cover, no doubt. So in order to make it through this rigged game, which was 16th century Europe, she went for several different names during her life. So it can get a little bit confusing, but she went through the name of Gracia Mendes. She also went through the name of Beatriz de Luna, so Beatrice de Luna kind of thing, and Anna Nassi, and some other combination of these. Sometimes things change a little bit around. We will do our best to keep track of this and make it as clear as possible.
Apart from all those names, she was also just known as La Senora, right?
Yeah, which just means like the lady. So this can hint a little bit maybe at how important and big she was. I mean, if you can be referred to as just the lady, that's a bit telling, isn't it?
So to dive right into her life, now that we know that she was going by many different names, we have to go a little bit back to 1492, and that's an infamous year in the Iberian Peninsula. A year that was forever marked as the year in which the Catholic monarchs Fernando and Isabella of Spain issued a decree that expelled the Jews from Spain. That decree meant that all the Jewish populations inhabiting the lands would have to either face a forced conversion to Catholicism or they would need to leave everything behind and flee. There are many ways in which populations cope with this, from conversion to fleeing, as we were saying, and to just keep on professing their faith in a private setting while living publicly as Catholics, but we're gonna get into that.
Yeah, I think one of the good things that we will have a chance to see through this lady in this episode is a little bit into the lives of 16th century Jewish population and how all the different ways that people coped with their situation.
Yeah, and the impact was foreign and wide, and these measures had a profound impact in the country and its population. And of course, we can always think how different history would be if that hadn't taken place. But anyway,
yeah, it's one of those what ifs, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of those.
Yeah.
But scholars disagree on the numbers of people that fled the kingdom. And these numbers vary from as few as 150,000 to around 1 million. And probably the numbers are something in between these two. Although there's a lot of the conversions as well to be counted in. So the impact on the overall population is difficult to count.
Getting back to Our Lady, her family, Gracia's parents, they decided to leave. They used to live in Spain, and they decided to leave when this happened. And they moved to Portugal, which was the closest safe space that allowed them to be who they wanted to be. And
not for long.
Yeah, but not for long. I mean, a few years later, after they moved into Portugal, the Portuguese prince was meant to marry the Spanish princess. So this happened quite a bit, like Portugal, Spain, marry, intermarry, you know how royal families go. So when the Portuguese prince asked for the hand of the Spanish princess, his request was accepted. Everyone was happy for them to marry, on the condition that Portugal would also follow suit and get rid of their Jewish population. So it's like, yeah, you can have the princess, but can you please get rid of them? I'm sad to say that the prince accepted these terms, and on the year of 1497, Portugal would follow into Spain's footsteps and make the world a worse place. So there were horrible things at the time. There was a forced conversion of children from the Jewish families, and there were mass conversions. So these were obviously imposed and forced upon the Jewish population, and obviously a very traumatic event. When we first think about a situation like this, we might think, looking from our privileged situation, that converting would be the safest and most convenient solution if we ignore that these people were being forced to deny their beliefs and forced to worship a different god. So we might sometimes be tempted to think, well, it's fine. You just say, yeah, I mean, the king is forcing this upon you, so yeah, you don't want to be killed, you don't want to be moved to another country. Yeah, sure, I'll just go with a different god. We can be tempted to think something like this. But actually, this was no solution at all. Like, these people from then on, like the ones who chose to convert, who are like, okay, we won't follow the Jewish faith anymore. We are now Christians. We accept the Christian God. Please just let us be and let us live here, and we are happy to go with your rules. These were called new Christians, or conversos in Portuguese would be like conversos or new Christians, and they would become the favorite prey of the Inquisition. That's another thing we're gonna dive into today. So for those who don't know, the Inquisition was a religious police court kind of thing that goes around prosecuting and taking people to trial. I'm doing inverted commas here, because it's like trial should be taken with a pinch of salt, because we can hardly consider it a fair trial or a trial in any way. But yes, so they were taking these people to trial, let's say, for the most varied reasons, and just going to town on it.
Yeah, I think you raised a very important point, because even these conversions, when we're talking at the time, the symbolic importance of faith and how people lived faith is not as near as we do in the West after the 19th century. So, like, the meaning of all this would be much it would have much more depth to it than just, let's convert and we're all good with that, and it doesn't matter who we worship. Like, atheism is not on the table. Like, the
No,
existence of
no,
God is
no.
not put into question as it is later on. So this is pre all that.
To even consider denying the God they believe in, the importance of your immortal soul is much more on the table. Like, it's ever present. People, we know, like, medieval times weren't easy. Like, people died more, they had a completely different relationship with death than we have in today's world. And obviously, human beings will always try to stay alive, right? That's the thing. But, like, to stay alive at what cost? Like, if you are damning your soul for, and you really believe that, if you're denying your God and damning your soul for, like, all eternity, things are suddenly very different. It has a completely different weight.
Yeah, and on top of that, then you convert and you become this Cristo Novo, or new Christian, that you were talking about, and your life's still going to be horrible because you're still going to like, you're still going to be like the group of people that the Inquisition will go after, and that will be on the spotlight of anything. And so yeah, like, the options are not great.
No, because that's the thing. It's like, sometimes we might, when we look at this with today's lenses, before you actually consider everything at the time, you might think, oh, just convert. Firstly, just convert wasn't that easy. And then it's like, when they're actually like, okay, yeah, fine, we'll just convert. And then it's like, oh, actually, no, we're still not down with that. No, that doesn't work for us.
Yeah. And I think that, like, this Inquisition, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it, like, extensively on this episode and maybe in some others, it's still in some shape or form in our collective imagination, so we have an idea about it, and almost as a pop cultural reference.
Yeah, because it's the Spanish Inquisition. Shout out to Monty Python.
Yes, we have a Monty Python fan in the house. And
I think it's a reference for instance, our British people who might be listening to us, like,
who knows?
if there's any.
So yeah, when we think of stuff like witch trials and people reporting on people and on what people were doing, so we have an idea about it.
Yeah.
But of course, with that, like with any systems of oppression and control, Inquisition was a force that could implement ways of being and ways of living, but of course it was used for far more than that. Like, people would then use it for other stuff.
This takes me back. I mean, I'm gonna just do a small tangent here and do a little parallel. For instance, I think what we see with the Inquisition, we actually see a lot of times during history, and one of the examples that comes to my mind is, for instance, in the Roman times, when we have Sulla, the dictator Sulla, and his prescriptions, for instance. And I think with the Inquisition, exactly the same kind of thing is gonna happen. So
anytime there's a police that can control people's lives, it's used for much more than what it should be.
Exactly.
Well, it's not like it should be used for anything, but
yeah, exactly. And then it just goes that extra step. Usually these systems, they rely a lot in people telling on other people, for instance. Anyone can report on anyone, regardless of what the people were actually doing. So imagine, you have a disagreement with someone, and I mean, we know there's always drama in life, right? So imagine, I don't know, your neighbor's goat keeps pooping in your yard, like, just report on her. She's a witch! I mean, I'm not gonna say that. Or am I?
Your neighbor has more Instagram followers than you? She's a witch.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, you have anything. Again, there's this person you don't like very much. I mean, you just, you have someone that you can report to, and she's a witch, and,
That's it.
And here it's... Yeah.
And now imagine that you just converted and your family is constantly being watched and under suspicion of secretly still being practicing Judaism, regardless of whether you're actually doing it or not, and permanently at the risk of being reported by someone.
Yeah, because I want to say that even though Inquisition, like we were talking about, like she's a witch here, it wasn't so much about witch hunting at this time. That's just what's in our popular imagination. But like at this time, it was about a lot about are they all these new Christians being accused of still practicing Judaism? So I mean, you have anything against your neighbor, against anything, whatever it is you don't like, you just go like, hey, yeah, so I heard like they're actually still doing stuff in private, and Inquisition is all over them. They get taken away. They get,
Tortured, killed.
yeah, they get interrogated, and I mean, interrogated at this time means torture, means every kind of ways to get the results that you want.
Now imagine that money is involved and that your neighbor is actually a better jeweler than you are.
Exactly. Well, imagine there's like, it's a business. It's like, oh, there's 2 cafes in the same street. Oh, hey, I heard they're doing Judaism in the back. And there you go, and they're gone, basically. So obviously this opens up to, whenever it's as you were saying, whenever there's this kind of policing and people can just report on anyone, it's a very effective way first to be complete control of the population, and then to just be a terror rule. It's ironic, really, because by forcibly converting Jews and Muslims to Christianism, the Inquisition was attempting to build their dream of a purely Christian country, and turning everyone into Christians, one way or another, was meant to accomplish that dream. But like every dictatorial regime ever, then it doesn't end there. Then you need to ensure that they stay that way, and paranoia ensues because, those people don't actually want to be Christians. And then you start thinking, oh, the country is crawling with crypto Jews and fake Christians, and that surely justifies the desperate means. And this rule of terror is the setting for Gracia's life.
Just a side note, as we're not going to go into that right now, but of course that the Inquisition was not only just persecuting Jews. There were a lot of other groups in society that were also being persecuted. It's the usual tale, as we know.
Yeah, of course. Anything, all minorities, anything that they have an excuse, really, to torment. There you go.
Yeah, but this is the setting where baby Gracia was born, and she was born in 1510, some 20 years after her family had moved to Portugal from the Kingdom of Aragon. From the Kingdom of
Aragon.
Gosh, in modern day Spain, to escape these new laws. Her Christian name was Beatriz de Luna. So
yeah, Beatriz. Yeah,
Beatriz de Luna. Gracia or Graça was the Portuguese translation of her Jewish original name of Hannah.
What we see is that for most of her life, or when she had that option, she actually chose to use the translation of the Jewish name, because she was living in, Portugal and Spain and stuff. So the translation of the Jewish name over her Beatriz de Luna. So in history, usually she's regarded as Gracia.
Yes, and her family was extraordinarily wealthy, and we can say
extraordinarily
wealthy, and this was the case for a few of the Jewish families. Of course, that didn't do them any favors in the eyes of the country.
I mean, yeah, but then again, being poor never really helped anyone either, right?
Right.
The truth is, racism and bigotry will always prevail and use everything at their disposal to justify the hatred. We hate them because they're rich, and we hate them because they're poor.
Very, very true, Inish. And going back to her family had firstly focused on the precious stones business, and by the beginning of that century, they had expanded to banking activities. They were doing international transfers, dealing in commodities. accepting valuables for safekeeping, loaning money to individuals, royalty, and governments.
Yeah, that's how rich they were. They're lending money to royalty and governments.
Yeah. And later on the 16th century, it's the same family that would hold the largest share of the spices trade and became even more influential as they would have control over the stock market in several countries.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's really clear in everyone's minds how important the spice trade was for Portugal in the 16th century. So Portugal in the 16th century was actually one of the leading powers in the world. And this was all because this was all basically due to not only the spices trade, but due to the trade routes going on between Portugal and Asia, which just, well, Portugal, Africa, Asia, which just opened the world and Portugal to an immense wealth. And I actually read that one of the things that her family was doing was as crazy. Okay, imagine the ships going to from Portugal to India to stock up on these spices, right? And then bring them back to Europe and sell them and make a huge amount of profit on the way, right? So what, obviously, if you imagine 16th century and the rickety boats that they were in, so these trips lasted months and they were extremely, dangerous. There were the odds that something would go wrong were high, right? Like, to understate it a bit. So one of the things that they were doing, her family, was actually to insure the Portuguese government.
Right, so they were in the insurance business.
Yeah, so imagine how wealthy you have to be that you're insuring these ships to go to India and then come back, and then that way allow the crown to make business.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I don't think we can quite picture how well they were doing. And this is just at the time that she was starting. It will go beyond that, as we're gonna say.
Yeah, and at 18 years old, she married another secret Jew named Francisco Mendes.
Yeah. How would we say it in English? Like Francisco Mendes?
There we go. That should be it. He was a loaded businessman who was probably her uncle. That was the tradition with Jewish families in the 16th century. And so they had a baby girl called Reina.
It might sound odd for our contemporary look to, marry your uncle, but we have to understand that in very persecuted communities, you tend to try to keep to the ones you can trust. So obviously marrying new Christians with old Christians, let's say, it was just not gonna happen, because neither teams, let's say, neither teams trust one another. So the old Christians don't want to be involved, and the new Christians don't trust them with their life. So you tend to much more keep to your community, and that we can see that through history, not just in here.
So Gracia and her husband and now her daughter were living in Lisbon, and they did for a while, even as things got increasingly difficult, and things had started to become very difficult for the Jewish population even before Gracia was born. So it's not a new thing, because even right before Gracia was born in 1506, there was what we now know as the Lisbon massacre. But what is that, Inês?
Well, Lisbon massacre has the name hints at. It's a massacre that took place in Lisbon. So I know, shocker, you couldn't have guessed that. This actually, like you were saying, it happened in 1506. And it started on Easter Sunday, and it was actually a horrible, terrible event. So 1506 is actually 4 years before Gracia was born. This would be such a terrible event that the reach and the impact it would have on the population would just be forever felt. So basically it was an absolute bloodshed where new Christians were killed in the most horrific manners by a bloodthirsty mob. So picture the worst you can and then some. So it all started in a church, funny enough, where people were praying for the end of the drought and plague that was ravaging the country. When a man said he had just witnessed the face of Jesus Christ on the altar, which, everyone interpreted as a miracle right there and then. I mean, everyone but a man. And this man was a new Christian or a converted Jew who said had just been a trick of the light. Which, I mean, between you and me, it does sound a lot more plausible, but no, the crowd was having none of that. And they dragged him outside, beat him to death, and burnt his body at the stake in the main square nearby. And with this, hell was unleashed and...
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, don't bring Jesus into this. He started... No, Jesus. Don't bring...
No, I don't think he started. I don't think he'd ever wanted it, actually. But anyway, that's another topic.
So, with this, I mean, hell was then unleashed. The new Christians became scapegoats for the plague, famine, and drought, and the mob composed of locals and foreign sailors, because, as we mentioned, like, Lisbon was a big port and it was all about trade and ships and stuff at the time. So a mob of locals and foreign sailors just started to complete hunt down these new Christians, motivated by these two priests telling them that they would be absolved of the sins of the last 100 days if they killed conversos. Tragically, on that Sunday, more than 500 people were killed and burnt at the stake. The king and the court, they weren't in Lisbon, which was often the case, but especially because of the plague, as we were mentioning before. And when word reached them that the city forces were incapable of keep the order, they sent the magistrates to try and rein it in. But, I mean, it was far gone by then. The Monday next day was even worse. It was just way more violent. It is estimated that around 1,000 people died on that day. And I mean, you can just picture the most horrific ways, right? I mean, people were dragged from their houses, ripped to pieces, as in dismembered in the streets, thrown against the walls and burned at the stake, both dead and alive. So it's just picture hell on earth, and that's what you get here. Yeah. Looting was rampant, of course, as it is in these things, like pillaging for valuables started. It was just, again, hell on earth. Finally, on Tuesday, the royal guard arrived and order, started slowly being imposed and conquered, and the sailors ran off with their loot in their boats, and members of the mob were then sentenced, and the treasonous priests stripped of their powers and burnt at the stake as well. And by Tuesday, the records show that more than 1,900 had died. I mean, 2,000 people basically died in this massacre.
Yeah, and if you go to Lisbon nowadays, you'll find a memorial actually in the place where it all started. So right in front of the São Domingos church. There's a church in Rocio. Rocio is still the main square in Lisbon, and there's a church there. That's where it all started, and in front of it now you have a memorial for the lives lost in that day and in all the other hardships that the Jewish community had to face throughout the centuries.
Yeah, it's just because, as we know, it didn't end there, but I mean, yeah, this is one of the... Because it happened... It's curious, isn't it, to see how long this nonsense has been going on for. I mean... I guess it's what we were talking about, like bigotry and, racism and just there's always a way to go through with it, but yeah.
So this is also the moment when Dom Manuel, the king, would decide to remove part of the title of the city of Lisbon after the massacre. So previously, Lisbon would be referred to as the Muy Nobre y Leal Cidade, which means the very noble and loyal city of Lisbon. And Dom Manuel decides to remove that part of the title of the city to somehow mark this massacre. And a few years from then, Gracia's family is growing and they decide to move on.
And they're now planning a new base in Antwerp, and this is modern-day Belgium, and it was at the time, part of the Spanish Empire, although it was the Inquisition was not acting there, and it became a safe haven for many of the Jewish families. Many of them were also involved in this trade that we were talking about before. So that the space trade and the space trade. So they were involved. So they were involved in space trade. First astronauts right here, planning to take the moon. And no, but they were on the spice trade.
Spice trade,
which
yes,
was,
not space. People, you don't go saying that we are talking about 16th century space trade from Antwerp.
So as I was saying, they were part of this spice trade, and Francisco, the husband, had started these preparations in face of the changes lived in Portugal, with the massacre, with Inquisition, but he would actually die in 1536 before seeing them through and leaving Gracia, just 26 years old, and a widow with a 5-year-old daughter to fend for. The family then sent Diogo, that was the younger brother of Francisco, so Gracia's brother-in-law, to Antwerp to start the preparation, set up the family business, and he didn't disappoint in doing that. He did amazingly well, and he became the new star of the pepper trade. He created a multinational business, as we would call it today, compared to modern companies. They were dealing with huge volumes, pursuing multiple lines of business, different countries, with permanent branches everywhere, so things were looking up for them.
Yeah, I think we really need to think of them as like a modern company almost, because they had all these different lines. They were doing banking, and they were doing the spices trade, and they were doing insurance, and they were doing like other trades as well. And it's just they were all over the place, all over Europe, and at this point the world is becoming global, so they were
at the forefront of that.
I think it's quite yeah. Now, I'm not sure that all our listeners are aware of how important and huge the spices trade was in the 16th century. Like, spices were the thing. I'm not sure what would be comparable in today's terms.
Oil?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Yeah, that sounds like it might be a thing. Anyway, I know it might seem so bizarre these days. It goes by pennies at the supermarket. But I mean, back then, boy, it was gold. It was gold. It was cash money. I mean, now, this was absolutely wonderful news for Portugal, who at the turn of the century found the sea route directly to India, which meant that they could now hop on a ship in Portugal, go all around Africa, and get to India, get all them spices back to Portugal. I don't think I can oversay how revolutionary this was, right? I mean...
Yeah, to get stuff from Asia all the way back to Portugal without having to go through land, through Asia, through the Mediterranean Sea, and just find a way by sea, a route by sea that would go directly from Portugal to India, would make things much easier and with a lot of less hands involved. So it was a way of capturing that commerce
Yeah, because I mean, there were some like routes through land and stuff before, but this meant that like Italy was the one who, since antiquity had been profiting most from this. And right now, Portugal suddenly came into the game because no one needed the route land anymore. There was like a sea route, and Portugal was the one at the front of it. Now, I know getting on a boat and taking 5 years going and coming back to India through, unknown seas might not seem like the most convenient way to get the hands on some spices.
It's not like, well, but it's not like the other way was super fast either. So actually,
No,
it kind of depends
exactly.
on what you're comparing it to. If you're comparing it to flying a plane for 1 hour to get somewhere, like it's a bit different, but that's not the point of comparison for these things back then.
Yeah, exactly. So even though, this was a law, it still needed a lot of investment. It was groundbreaking and it changed the European route structures like forever. Money changed hands, new market hubs, routes popped up all over the places. The power dynamics in Europe completely shifted. Now, out of all the spices, pepper was the king and queen. It was the top prime commodity, and the Portuguese crown had its monopoly. And the Mendes family was controlling the pepper trade in the Low Countries. So that's the top level that these people are playing at.
Yeah, and playing at this level comes with a lot of risks, doesn't it? It always does. And the brother-in-law of Gracia was actually twice arrested, accused of heresy.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to try to take you down. If you're that target, everyone's going to be shooting for you.
And although he was accused twice, both the Portuguese crown and the Emperor Charles V and many consuls and magistrates came forward in support of the brother-in-law, and he was released both times, and the case against him dropped because, of course, all these people also had interests in the relations with him and in the routes that they controlled. So, yeah.
Money makes the world go
Yeah,
round.
it does.
So after the death of Francisco, Gracia's husband, they are going to leave Portugal. And who is they? They is Gracia with her baby daughter. Well, not so baby anymore, but with her daughter. And Gracia's sister, possibly two nephews, one of which is gonna be huge in the business. We are not sure, like the records are not very clear if the nephews travel with them at the same time from this time in Portugal, but anyway, they're gonna be with them later on, and they're gonna be, one of them is gonna be quite big for the family. Yeah, and we have records of the safe passages arranged by Diogo from Antwerp for these three women.
Gracia arrives in Antwerp, and she's now a widow, as we said, and she immediately jumps onto the family business with her brother-in-law, who clearly acknowledged her business talents and was happy to work with her as a partner. Apparently, she already had some experience, and she might even be managing the business in Portugal along with her husband, probably while he was sick before dying. So she knew what she was doing.
That's gonna become very, very clear very soon. Like, she knew what she was doing, alright. Usually, according to Jewish tradition, it would be sort of expected for Gracia to marry Diogo after becoming a widow from his brother. Might sound weird, but again, this was common practice in rich converso families as an attempt to keep the wealth and bloodline together. However, in this case, that's not gonna happen. So Diogo is gonna marry Gracia's younger sister, Brianda, instead. I mean, we're still keeping it in the family, don't get me wrong, but, she's not gonna have to marry the brother, which might hint a little bit at her taking a step into, standing on her own. We are gonna see more of that, but I think this is the first hint we get of that. Brianda and Diogo would have one daughter, which they named Beatriz or Gracia, in reference to Gracia, so as a proof of their devotion.
So this is the year of 1540, and in that same year, the Emperor Charles V decided to follow the trend and dabble in some anti-Semitism,
I mean, why wouldn't you?
ordering that all Jews, friends of Jews, and people dealing with Jews in Antwerp were to be investigated. This was a highway to blackmail these communities and sure a way to get some money into his banks at the expense of the threatened Jewish families. Once again, the family is in danger because they can never rest.
Yeah, we're gonna see that
all the time.
That's gonna be the...
Yeah, so they again need to relocate, and again, in the midst of all this, Diogo dies. So we see...
I mean, the men are falling like flies, baby.
Yeah, the same pattern right here, and this is 2 years after, so in 1542. And in his will, he would state that half the family fortune belonged to Gracia and the other half to his wife and daughter. However, even that was to be administered by Gracia. Again, we see the importance of Gracia and how she was being given full responsibility for everything at this point.
Yeah. And I mean, Brienda, understandably, she was not happy about this decision. And this would become a major issue between the two sisters, like we're gonna see. I mean, come on. Your husband leaves you, alright, half the fortune of the family, but then says your sister is gonna be the one to manage it? I
Not cool, bro.
Not
Cool, but I'm sure Gracia was happy.
Yeah, and I'm sure he did have his reasons, right? Like, I'm not saying it wasn't the right decision, but I wouldn't be happy about it either.
Drama.
So now we have Gracia as the big boss of all this fortune, all this family fortune, pepper trade, banking, insurance, like multinational companies, like going all around the world, and she's at the top of it.
And although we haven't had the chance to dive into Gracias yet, because we had to set the stage for all of what's coming next for her, now that she's moving to Antwerp is the time for us to take a break. And if you want to discover what happens to her there, you'll have to stick around and join us in the next episode where we'll tell you more about it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys, but Gracia is so huge, and the context that she's living in is just so... we can't just, fly over everything and ignore all these things. We really think she deserves a bit of a time to shine, and in this one, we're gonna be splitting into different episodes because there's just too much to go over.
So stick with us and find what happened to Gracia on the next episode. And this is where we'll stop for now. Stick with us and join us in the next episode of Cork Out History in 2 weeks.
Until then, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Cork Out History Pod, and on Twitter at Cork Out History, where you can reach out to us, let us know your thoughts, and discover more about the upcoming episodes.
Don't forget to rate and subscribe wherever you're listening to us.
Your comments are crucial so that more people can find us.
Bye! Bye.